every breath I take, I will give thanks to God. For as long as I shall live, I will testify to love.
We're kind of excited about getting this kicked off because we've been looking for a way to maybe reach people on a slightly different level, right? Try to get to where we can maybe dive into some little deeper topics than maybe we can get into on Sunday mornings. And, we chose the name Renew for this class very purposely. The hope is that we start renewing the way that we think, renewing the way that we feel about things. One of the sort of overarching things that we want to do is with each topic that we look at is actually kind of maybe come against some thinking that has sort of co-opted our minds from culture, right? We're hybrids in that we do take on, to some degree, everything we hear and everything we see enters our mind and stays there. Now, depending on, we can do with it as we want to, but most of us, and if you see the polls and if you ask people questions, they come back with an answer that is partially okay and partially sort of corrupted in some way. No necessarily evilness in that, but one of the things we want to start doing in this class is kind of coming against those sorts of things and say, okay, we're going to maybe pose a question or put something up to then sort of tear it down and rebuild it, and not just leave you with the rebuilt thing, but then let's also talk about it. Let's play with it. It's almost like kind of getting in the sandbox and building a little bit with what we just heard. And sort of at the end, I know David explained this sort of at the end, we'll come back, we'll talk about it. If you have any questions that comes up in discussion or something wasn't clear out here, come back and say, hey, this didn't make sense at all, and we'll just talk more about it if we need to. So it's going to be a lot more interactive maybe than what we're used to with Sunday service. So this is obviously definitely not a clone of Sunday morning. It's going to be a whole different thing. So what we're going to talk about tonight, the broad topic for the next 3 weeks is why God is God. All right? And the specific topic for tonight is why I am not God. Okay? Especially in America, we really have to ask that question. Why am I not God? And I can't remember the pastor that said this, so I can't give him credit, but he said that the chief problem with every man, woman, and child on the planet Earth, not just Christians, is that they have a wrong thinking about God. You can take all of the problems and nail it down to they have a wrong thinking about God, even if that thinking is He doesn't exist, right? So you get atheists from. If you have the thinking, oh well, God is part of everything, that's not true. Okay, so a wrong thinking about God affects every decision that we make in life. Maybe little bitty, errors, maybe huge errors. And so one of the things, we can't really jump into anything where we're going to get deep and talk about God and talk about Christ and talk about the work of the Holy Spirit and start talking about all of these practical aspects of life without sort of starting with right thinking about God. Am I the only one sweating in here? Okay. David, would you mind hitting the thermostats over there? I just realized I'm really moist, and that's good for no one. So, why I am not God, okay? Some of the things we're going to look at tonight is why I am not equal to God. Believe it or not, this is a fairly pervasive thought, that somehow I am on an equal playing field with God. I'm not going to call out specific belief systems or anything like that, but it is actually fairly pervasive in the Western Christianity. That somehow I'm on an equal playing field with God, and He has to do certain things when I say certain things or do certain things a certain way. Another fun one: why God is not just a more powerful version of me. Okay, so what this looks like is in our way of creating a box that we can put God in so we can understand him, so we can feel okay with this being that we cannot even begin to conceive of. Right? So we build this box and we say, well, he's basically just like me. He's just more powerful. All right? If you don't believe it, start listening to the way people talk about things, okay? Well, God wouldn't do that because X, Y, and Z. What they actually said was, I wouldn't do that if I was God because of X, Y, and Z. And so they're saying, see, God really thinks the same way that I do. All right, so we're going to get back to those a little bit later on. I just want to kind of give you a little bit of the hypothesis that I am working with tonight. So, I would usually take many hours of exhaustive conversation to talk about what we're going to talk about tonight in about 20 minutes. So, I hope you all brought your Bibles. We're going to read the first 11 chapters of Genesis tonight. And, I'm just kidding. And almost nobody blinked. June was the only one that started laughing. But I do want to start in Genesis. And here's the reason why, is we get the biggest statements about God as the Father, as the totality of the Trinity out of Genesis, the very first part. Some of it even comes out of what is not said. Okay, so by implication, we get some things. Let me ask, show of hands, who has created anything out of nothing? Nobody? Right off the bat, we get a shot across the bow of human thinking. Okay? Have we ever created anything out of nothing? Can we conceive of nothing? Can we conceive of, there is zero. We're not talking about empty space. There's still stuff in empty space. We're talking about nothing exists. Period. All right? The Hebrew was very specific, used a very big term, broad term, when it said he created everything out of nothing. Right? We use about 15 English words to describe what that term of nothing means. And it's all, it's void, it's doesn't exist, it's nothingness, it's translated differently all through the Old Testament. So when we want to start looking at this thing of who is God, we look at the first 4 words of the Bible. It says, in the beginning, God. In the beginning, God. The beginning of what? The beginning of anything that we might be able to conceive of. God was already there. Which is interesting because, to get into a little bit of Semitic thought, meaning that all of the peoples of the known world at that time, all of the gods that they believed in, all the gods that they worshipped, came from something. Right? It all started somewhere of something that man could conceive of. Right? Some of them were, well, this person cut off his arm and that's what became the moon, and cut off his leg and that's what became the sun. I mean, there's some wild stories that they used to do. One was, mother something birthed the sun and the moon, and that's why you worship the sun and the moon, because they're actually the children, the offspring of gods, those sorts of things. But nothing equaled, hey, this being existed before anything. He was it. Nothing else was there. He then took nothing and created everything that we have discovered 1% of in all of human history. Okay, we could stop right there and go, all right, I am not God. Okay, we're still trying to just explain. First we thought, speed of light travels at such and such. Yay, we figured that out. Well, then they figured out, no, it doesn't travel at a constant speed. It's moving. It changes speed all the time. Oh, wow, how does that work? There are so many mysteries out there left to what God did in this creation act that we are still discovering it. And here's another little, it's not in my notes, here's another little tidbit. Watched a documentary one time, a bunch of astrophysicists. That's a dry bunch, by the way. Watched a documentary done by astrophysicists. Said that when they looked at the Earth they became amazed that the earth was placed in the perfect place in the universe for discovery. They said, oh, a few hundred light years that way, a few hundred light years that way, we're in a cloud of dust. We can't see anything. Can't see out of our own atmosphere. They said, we're positioned perfectly in the universe to discover everything else that we know about. I think that's interesting. Okay, so we start with that the creation narrative, and Moses is trying to make a big point here because he's taking context is king. Who's he writing to? He's writing to Israel. He's writing to people who are coming out of slavery, right? That's his first audience. People who are coming out of slavery, coming out of Egypt. 10 generations have been in Egypt and have forgotten their heritage. All right? If you keep that in mind, the first part of Genesis makes a lot more sense. All right? It's a brief history of everything they need to know in order to get to who they are. All right? This is who God has called you to be. So, in the beginning, God. That statement specifically contrasts itself to a pantheon of gods. Right off the bat. There's not this big, like Hinduism, there's, thousands and thousands and thousands of gods. There is one God, and in the beginning, He was the only one. Okay? God is sovereign. I'm kind of going to give you some bullet points. When you read through the first chapter of Genesis, this is what you pick up on. God is sovereign. He's not fighting with any other God. There's no battle for dominion, who's going to be in charge, who's going to do any of this sort of thing. It's Him, and only Him. He simply spoke, and creation happened. So you have this God. He's the only one. He's not fighting for any other thing. He is in charge. And He speaks, and everything that we know and don't know came into existence. We can argue all day about how it happened, whatever. The point is, it happened. This same God who spoke creation into existence is the same God who later spoke to the patriarchs of Israel and made promises. He's the same God that spoke to Jeremiah and promised a new covenant. He's the same God that made the Davidic covenant and said, out of your line there is going to be one that comes and saves the whole earth. So this God who created the entirety of everything that we know is the same one that's making promises. He can probably fulfill those promises, right? So these are some of the big things that are going on. Another big one. God is superior to the heavenly bodies and other created things, okay? When you get to the Ten Commandments, and it says, do not worship anything else. Okay? And a lot of the old religions, pagan religions, they worshipped everything. Every little thing was put on a level with a god. God's pointing out right here, Moses is pointing out in the writing of it, that no. All of these things are simply in the environment. They're just simply here to make everything work. These things are not to be worshipped. These are created things. I am bigger than all these great things that you see. The focus also becomes that all of these things are not only not to be worshipped, that they are vital for human existence. All right, so that's something that is there for us, interestingly enough. God's work sort of climaxes with the creation of mankind in His image. This word is fun. This tells us a lot about the work that we were given when we came to this earth. The word that is translated as idol there, as image, is the word selem in Hebrew, and it means idol. Everywhere else in the Old Testament is translated idol. Something 37 times is translated idol, except for there it's translated image, because there's a negative connotation with the word idol. Moses, in his writing of what God did, literally said we were created as an idol. That when people saw us, they should see Him. What is an idol? That's not rhetorical. What's an idol? I was actually going to make one out of popsicle sticks and bring it in, but I thought that might be too edgy. Because it has no power, right? It's just wood. What's an idol? Anything that you worship that's not God. In the time period of this writing, they, built these little things, carved them out of wood, clay, whatever, and it was supposed to be a representation of the God that was being worshipped. And somehow it had some power, right? So, in Genesis, at the very beginning, God's coming and saying, oh, no. You are my representation on earth. Okay? And you don't worship idols, so we don't worship each other. Right? We are God's idol on the earth, which gets into a whole other set of theological issues that we're not going to deal with tonight. But keep that in mind, that God specifically used this term. We're made in His image. We're made in His likeness. Not necessarily physically or anything like that, but in nature. We were supposed to reflect Him in nature and character. And of course, the first two people that had a shot at it messed it up. God mandates rest for His creation. This is interesting, okay? So, God, who doesn't get tired, you would think, if He created the entire universe, He probably doesn't get winded very easy, mandates rest for His creation. Ceaseless activity was not supposed to be part of the plan. There was supposed to be rest. And so God models this when He said on the seventh day, He said, I rested from all my work. He went into eternal rest. It reflects back later in the Bible. He went into eternal rest. And he wanted his people to know what it was to relax and rest in Him and find peace in Him. Now, can I mandate to Matthew that he rest? Because it's good for our relationship. Not really. I could suggest it. He wouldn't listen to me, but I could suggest it. God can actually say, hey, here's a whole day. Yeah, you're not doing anything. In fact, not only you're not doing anything, but your animals aren't going to do anything either. You can't pawn it off on them. You can't train your horse to plow the field while you're obeying the Sabbath. All right? So, God is at a position that He can actually mandate at that time which days we work on, which days we rest on, what we're going to do with those days that we rest. So, God is not the gray-haired, long-bearded guy that we tend to think of sitting there, grandpa. All right? He intentionally makes it clear that He is other. He is other. He is not anything familiar that we can think about. Right? Anything that we think of to describe God is so woefully pitiful in trying to go about describing Him. There is nothing in creation other than what He chose to delegate to man. There's nothing in creation like Him other than what He chose to delegate to man. So there's a delegation thing that happens. He gave us certain powers. We're going to talk about that next week, what that relationship looks like, because God actually dictated the relationship too. He said, I'm God, you're man, these are my jobs, these are your jobs. The problem is we try to take His jobs and give Him ours most of the time. Okay, so we're going to talk about next week sort of what that looks like, and hopefully take some pressure off of people taking responsibilities that aren't ours. They're actually God's responsibilities. But He makes it really clear that He's other, and He can do that by saying, this is who I am. I created everything. I made it exactly the way I wanted it. It's not an accident. Right? It's not random happenstance. It's exactly the way I wanted it. Everything you see, exactly the way I wanted it. Of course, then it got messed up. So, this brings us to a question. I know Steve will give me an honest answer. Is it good for anybody if I am worshipped? It's okay, including myself. That's right, anybody, including myself. No, right? Even Wayne, as good of a man as he is, it's not good for anybody if we worship Wayne. All right? Is it good for anybody if we worship God? Right? We know that. Sort of inherently, we kind of go, yeah, makes much more sense to worship God. So then why are we drawn towards worshiping every other thing that we can worship besides Him? He made it clear. I'm bigger than everything. Not only bigger, I mean, we can't even, here's a paradox for you. Hopefully you don't lay awake at night thinking about this. How can the same God that could hold the universe in His palm also inhabit, if He wanted to, a molecule of water? We can't even apply size to Him. I mean, we can't even begin to conceive of who God is. And we say, oh, God, come in this room. Rue the day God comes in this room. Our fleshly bodies could not handle it. This building, this entire continent would melt into magma if He brought His full presence into this room. This is not a little built thing. Why did idolatry make one of the 10 biggies? In fact, if you really want to look at the ones that God really, really dislikes, it's idolatry. And if you want to go back a little further, idolatry is kind of at the core of everything that He says not to do. I haven't decided what to do the third week. That may be what we do on the third week, is kind of break all those down and kind of get to the root of all of them. But why is it that we want to worship everything but Him? And this is one of those things. This is one of those, I'm going to look at my life and I'm going to see, what am I drawn to? If you gave me your checkbook, I'll tell you who your God is. Give me 20 minutes with it. I'll tell you who your God is. I'll tell you what you worship. It's the same thing with me. Right? You look at my bank account. Look at my time spent. All right? Look at my browser history. How much time is spent on Facebook? How much time is spent shuffling emails back and forth? How much time do I spend reading about, the great Alabama football? How much time too long? But we build idols out of everything. And last on our list most of the time is the God that created everything. That's why creation theology is so important. I can't remember the last sermon I've ever heard on creation theology. Creation theology is the crux of all of it. Right? You have no salvation. What's the first act of grace? First act of grace. Creation. Grace, an undeserved kindness. Something that is undeserved. We weren't even here to deserve anything. The first act of grace is our own creation. He didn't have to do that. What kind of heartache was God signing up for when He made us? I mean, seriously. Just look around the room. I am. What kind of heartache was He signing up for when He made us? Now, I'm talking about me. You're talking about grace. He didn't have to do it. There was nothing that said He had to do that. He voluntarily made us. And then we decide, He's not really all that. Yeah, I'll worship Him for half an hour on Sunday morning. Yeah, I'll do that. I'm messing on purpose. I'm kind of poking on us a little bit. If we really stop and think, what place does God take in our life? Do we really believe Do we really believe that He is who He says He is? Do we really believe it? It affects every single thing that we do. It affects every single thing that we do. We're not even getting to salvation yet. All right, we're just talking about this is the beginning. This is just God declaring who He is to all of us. Do we really believe He is who He says He is? Okay. Now, do we have the right concept of God? I want to read you. The reason I started with creation stuff is because that is how God defends Himself throughout the rest of the Bible. Right? When He makes covenants, when He made the Abrahamic covenant with Abraham, that's redundant. When He made the covenant with Abraham, who did He call to be witnesses of the covenant? Because you always have to have a witness when you make a covenant. Do it? Himself. I can't witness my own stuff when I make a covenant with somebody. Right? Other places, He calls heaven and earth to be the witness to the agreement that He's making. Right? In other places, He says, I am the creator of everything. That's who I am. And then let me tell you who you are. Exodus 19. Beautiful. We'll week 3 get into that. Exodus 19. I am the God that brought you out of Egypt on eagle's wings to be a holy nation, land of priests and witness to other nations and all these things. And this is who you are. And He starts telling Israel who they're going to be. All right? But He starts it with, hey, look at what I did. Right? It's a big thing. So He defends Himself with creation all the way through. So I'm going to take you all to Job, one of the more cheerful books of the Bible. And I'm going to have to get some new jokes. You guys are a hard crowd. Wow. So if you're familiar with Job, we won't read the whole thing. There's only 42 or 43 chapters. I forget how many there are. But Job, Satan points him out and he says, hey, you're saying this guy's all righteous and everything. I bet I can break him. Right? I bet I can break him. What an honor that would be to be pointed out in that way, but I'm not sure it's an honor that I would necessarily want. God says, okay, take your best shot. You can't kill him. All right, take your best shot. So he loses everything. Horrible, horrific ways, loses everything. Has these, sorry for the strong language, but idiot friends who are just constantly giving him bad theology. Constantly giving him bad theology. I mean, just like, well, what did you do to deserve this? Why don't you just kill yourself? Save God the trouble. Kill yourself. So when you get over, after everything's done, his friends are still hypothesizing why God's been treating him so bad. Job, he gets over into chapter 29, and he's been talking for a while. Let me make sure this is not a good idea if you ever teach a class to change translations in midstream. It gets a little hard to follow things when you're on notes. Yeah, that's what I thought on 29. Okay. He says, I long for the years gone by when God took care of me, when He lit up the way before me and I walked safely through the darkness. When I was in my prime, God's friendship was felt in my home. The Almighty was still with me, and my children were around me. My cows produced milk in abundance, and my groves poured out streams of olive oil. Those were the days when I went to the city gate and took my place among the honored elders. The young stepped aside when they saw me, which means they're giving him honor. And even the aged rose in respect at my coming. The princes stood in silence and put their hands over their mouths. The highest officials of the city stood quietly, holding their tongues in respect. And he goes on like that for another 15 verses. Then in chapter 30, he starts out, but I am mocked by people younger than I, by young men whose fathers are not worth worthy to run in with my sheepdog. A lot of good they are to me, those worn-out wretches. And he goes on, it gets worse. And now they mock me with vulgar songs. So they're making up songs about him now, okay, about all the bad things that have happened to him. They despise me and won't come near me except to spit in my face, all right? Now this is directed at God. All right, this is directed at God. He's with other people. He's directed at God. For God has cut my bowstring. He has humbled me. So they have thrown off all restraint. Let's see, we'll go ahead. And now life seeps away. Depression haunts my days. At night my bones are filled with pain, which gnaws at me relentlessly. With a strong hand, God grabs my shirt. He grips me by the collar of my coat. He has thrown me into the mud. I'm nothing more than dust and ashes. Okay, he's speaking kind of strong now. Okay, I cry to you, O God, but you don't answer. I stand before you, but you don't even look. You have become cruel toward me. You use your power to persecute me. You throw me into the whirlwind and destroy me in the storm. And I know you are sending me to my death, the destruction of all who live. And he goes on and on for another chapter and a half. Another guy jumps in for a little while, basically says, I'm tired of listening to your whining. Here's the truth of stuff. And then we get to chapter 38, and you see it starts off, then the Lord answered Job from the whirlwind. Wow, that's... Okay. When I read this again last night, I got really uneasy at this first statement. Okay? Job 38:2. Who is this that questions my wisdom with such ignorant words? Brace yourself like a man, because I have some questions for you, and you must answer them. You never want to hear those words come from God. I've actually heard these in prayer time because I was doing something much the same as Job. Okay, I was whining like a little baby, and I heard very, very similar things. And here's God's answer to Job in all the things that Job laid out there, right? Valid concerns. Here's God's answer. Where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth? That's interesting. All of these complaints of mistreatment, all of these complaints of not being taken care of like he was accustomed to, and God answers his question that he answers him with is, where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth? And it goes on. Tell me, if you know so much, who determined its dimensions and stretched out the surveying lines? What supports its foundations, and who laid its cornerstone? As the morning stars sang together, and all the angels shouted for joy. Who kept the sea inside its boundaries, and as it burst from the womb? And as I clothed it with clouds and wrapped its thick darkness. For I locked it behind barred gates, limiting its shores. So basically, I told the sea, the ocean, the vast ocean, which is a great thing, a mystery to people at that time, I told it where its boundaries are. Okay, I'm in control of where the ocean sits. I said, this far and no further will you come. Here your proud waves must stop. Have you ever commanded the morning to appear and caused the dawn to rise in the east? All right, now you're going. You start getting antsy with those kinds of questions at this point. It's like, well, no, I don't guess I have. Have you made daylight spread to the ends of the earth and bring the end to the night's wickedness? As the light approaches, the earth takes shape like clay pressed beneath a seal. It is robed in brilliant colors. The light disturbs the wicked and stops the arm that is raised in violence. Have you explored the springs from which the sea came? Now he's talking, have you gone to the floor of the ocean? Have you been there, Mr. Job? I'm going to start jumping down because this goes on for chapter after chapter after chapter. It's a pretty fascinating read if you've never read it. Where does light come from and where does darkness go? Scientists are still having some trouble answering these questions, by the way. And this is the oldest book of the Bible. It was written very, very, very long ago. Can you take each to its home? Do you know how to get there? I'm jumping. Have you visited the storehouses of the snow or seen the storehouses of hail? Does the rain have a father? Who gives birth to the dew? Can you direct the movement of the stars? Let's see. Can you shout to the clouds and make it rain? Do you know where the wild goat gives birth? Have you watched as deer are born in the wild? And he goes on and he just asks these questions that only the Creator of everything has the right to ask and actually has the answer. So Job is railing in his misery, and God's answer to him is, since you know everything, can you tell me about this? And can you tell me about that? And can you tell me about that? And to his credit, I want to go to Job's answer. Starting in 42:1. Then Job replied to the Lord, I know that you can do anything, and no one can stop you. You asked, who is this that questions my wisdom and with such ignorance? It is I. And I was talking about things I knew nothing about, things far too wonderful for me. You said, listen, and I will speak. I have some questions for you, and you must answer them. I had only heard about you before, but now I have seen you with my own eyes. I take back everything I said, and I sit in dust and ashes to show my repentance. Job finally got the big picture. Even in all of everything that had happened to him, we would look at that and say, yeah, you got a right to question this. This is not right. He questions God. God comes back with, let me ask you, do you know? He replies with creation theology. Right? He replies with, creation theology, pointy head term that means knowing God through creation. Okay? There are so many ways to know God throughout Scripture. That's the first one. God replies to Job using that. Of all the things he could have used to reply to this man's anguished, angry questions, because he had believed lies from his friends. Almost believed lies from his friends. It was starting to get to him. And God answers with, hey, do you know where the mountain goat has its baby over there? I can tell you, because I've taken keen interest in it. And the amazing thing about this is this man, Job, sits down and says, you're right, I'm sorry. I had a wrong thinking about you. I thought I had you figured out. I thought I had you in the box. But I didn't even scratch the surface. And so, if we're going to renew our mind, and we're going to take a fresh approach to things, and we're going to start really challenging ourselves to have a mind change, a heart change, and allow God to begin to transform us into the people He's called us to be, we have to start with, how do we think about God? Have we made Him so small and so weak and so insignificant in our own thinking that we have no reverence for Him? And when He doesn't give us what we want, we go to the next thing that might give us what we want. And so in this completely steeped in materialism culture that we live in, we are being bombarded with these messages so more frequently than the message of who God is. So that's sort of the challenge for tonight, to start thinking about and to get to spend some time, and I guess David come back up here, but to start let's peel ourselves open a little bit. Let's make room for God to come in and go, okay, here's where you don't have right thinking about me. Here's where your heart is hard to me.
With every breath I take, I will give thanks to God.